Okay, great. So hi everyone, my name is Amitai. I'm your chair for this round. I go by he, him pronouns. Let's start with the introductions. Prof.
P1 Daniel, pronoun he, him.
P2 Amir, pronouns he, him.
Go with.
Brendan, are you there?
And we will be going reply for God. Rod, who will be going reply.
Oh, sorry, I'm doing the reply P1 Daniel.
Okay, great. I see all posted their speaker order in the chat. Please do indicate right before your speech your PY preference. I'm also not going to put timestamps in the chat because I prioritize tracking your speeches. Please indicate if you have a special need for me to do so, and we can do that for your specific speech. Lastly, please do open your cameras if possible throughout the round, and especially during your speech. With that, happy to call upon PM here.
Hello, just confirming that I'm audible. I'm sorry, I can't turn my camera on because I'm just having a power outage at the moment, so I'm just using data. Okay, I'll just 2 seconds and then I'll count myself in when I'm ready. Just getting my notes together. Cool. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. The undergraduate model turns education into a tool for the oppression, where it makes people only as valuable as being a product of their labor, where people are trained to do one specific thing and that thing only, unable to change, unable to pursue different interests, and pigeonholed for the rest of their life as a cog in the capitalist machine. We think the graduate model is able to provide people with greater freedom and allow people to access better quality education overall. Quickly, 2 pieces of context on the difference between the graduate and undergraduate model. The graduate model pretty much just works is you do a general undergraduate degree generally in line with your interests, such as you want to do English or philosophy or politics if you're going to study law, or you study biology, physiology, ethics, etc. if you want to go into medicine. And undergraduate looks like you just go straight into your career. We think that the difference is often the length of these different things. But let me just frame to you why we don't really think that length and debt is why we think it's pretty much a non-issue in this debate. Firstly, we think that this debate isn't just in the USA because it's likely, so we can still have other countries where you're likely to still be subsidized a lot of these careers, like most places in Europe, a lot of countries in Africa, and most places in Asia. Secondly, we think that is likely to not be that difference of a length. So such as your postgraduate is likely to be a lot shorter. So when you study an undergraduate medicine, it's likely to be 7 years, but when you just pursue it as a graduate degree, it's just 2 years, like 3 years extra on top of you doing a biology degree. But thirdly, we think that you're likely to be higher paid because you're able to have greater productivity when you know more. And I'll prove to you this in my argument. So you're likely when you're getting higher paid, it doesn't really matter if you accumulate slightly higher debt. That's why our framing of this debate proves to you that it's it's not really that much of a difference in terms of your effort that you have to put into this, but you're likely to get a lot greater skills from doing it. 3 arguments you're going to hear from my speech. Firstly, a better quality workforce. Secondly, why we are better for job security. Thirdly, why we're better for career fulfillment. And Amir is going to explain to you why we're better for for education and research. Firstly, why are we better for the quality of the workforce? 2 pieces of framing for this argument. Firstly, they think that the globalization of industries means that you're expected to have greater knowledge on varieties of issues and circumstances and be able to apply your skills to greater circumstances that are more globalized and a more variety of issues. Secondly, we think that with AI increasing, it's replacing various different jobs. Notably, it's very unpredictable and people are unable to predict what it's going to replace. Like people said, oh, AI could never replace therapy, but the biggest app for therapy online is better BetterHelp, which uses AI in order to try therapy people and have automatic responses to people. Our claim is that we're able to make our labor force more productive and more knowledgeable and more secure to fluctuations of the economy. 3 ways we do this. Firstly, we think that you have a greater knowledge base to refer to. So you're able to understand different sectors and able to value the intersectionality that these different sectors have with each other, such as you studying both economics, finance, and law, means that you're able to make better decisions in relation to the global context that you exist in. So when you're making a decision as a legal decision, you're able to refer to the different economic circumstances that's existing. But if you also study something like global politics, you're able to also understand how this is going to affect different parts of the world and not just you and your monolithic experience of the world. Moreover, we think that it just gets greater critical thinking for the reason that you've greater, you've been exposed to more schools of thought, you've been exposed to various people and various ideologies, not people that have the same interests as you and often come from the same backgrounds as you, so you're likely to be able to apply skills in a more different way and a more diversified way. Secondly, on collaboration, for the above reason, you're exposed to more people, different schools of thought, and just more people that have different interests because you pursue more generalized degrees, which means that it's not people that have the exact same niches as you. So you're able to think about other people, you get exposed to more people, and you're likely to work with these people better based on the fact that you've had previous experience with working a variety of people. Thirdly, we think that you're likely to be more productive. A, because you need less consultation on different resources because you've already been educated on these certain skills, but B, you're able to understand issues in context so you can make quicker decisions without having to consult the collateral of these different decisions. Moreover, you're able to make greater ethical decisions when you have greater knowledge of the world because you're able to place these issues in context, not just within your own bubble. This argument has 2 impacts for this round. Firstly, we think that companies are able to process higher volumes of work and labor. This means that they're able to get higher profit and higher turnover rates, meaning that the sectors are able to grow, you're able to solve more problems, and you're able to be more productive, meaning that you're likely to also get higher tax and a higher level of because higher levels of services are being offered. Secondly, you're able to outcompete AI for longer. AI isn't going to capture people's skills as easily and as quickly because people are more diverse beings, meaning that we have more time to address how we're going to solve AI and what its implications are for global markets. Before I go into my second argument about job security, I'll take that POI quickly.
Your characterization is exclusive to the people who have the capacity to explore different educational opportunities, who probably will on either side of this debate by taking different courses. What about the people who need immediate sources of income? And what about the people that are struggling to actually pay off those debts?
So we think that people who need immediate sources of income are likely not to pursue either of these models. They're likely to do things like more technical courses anyways within this debate. So we don't think that they're that important. But again, I've given you framing why it's likely to be 1 or 2 years longer, and you're likely to get higher paid at the end of it as well. So we don't think that that delta is that big compared to you're able to be more productive overall and thus get paid overall better. So even if it's 1 more extra year, we think you can take out a loan for this and you're able just to, repay it even better and get greater job stability in the future. But I think this argument about job security also responds to that quite well, because even on your side, you might be able to quickly get a job and you're able to get immediate finances, but this is pretty much doesn't matter in our analysis analytically prior if that job becomes redundant. Notably, we are better for job security in 2 ways. Firstly, we think if your one job or your one specialized skill that you've done becomes redundant, you have greater skills to refer to, meaning that you have another skill so you can immediately move to another sector, or if you want to study a specialized course, it's likely just to be a 2 years master's degree program or a 1-year course, rather than you having to pursue a whole other degree that's likely to take a lot more time. So we're able to make, when you have immediate shifts of careers, likely to be a lot less costly to you. But secondly, we think that it's better for older people and people that have existed. We think that is a preferred motion, so we can also look retrospectively as to how this world would have developed. So older people that didn't understand that AI is going to exist, we don't even know if there's likely to be another form of general AI that's going to exist that's really going to replace all forms of human value. We can't really predict the future with technological booms. We think that the graduate model provides a much greater safety net and a broader variety to unexpected uncertainties that could exist in the future. Thus, we're likely to get greater job security because you're more stable, as well as you're able to transfer out of careers when they become more and more redundant, as we've been seeing increasingly in the status quo. Last argument then, as to why we're able to get more career fulfillment. Notably, this also has a principal impact to it, because we tell you that education is also meant to provide people with value, and it's not just meant to turn people into tools and machines, because this pretty much is almost the same thing as slavery, where people don't really have any value outside of their labor, and people really don't see themselves as multifaceted people. 3 ways we do this. Firstly, is you become less pigeonholed. You have more time to explore other options when you're in university, because you're exposed to a different variety of skills and other forms of things that you can like. B, it means that it's easier for you to change it. So perhaps because you're your preferences are something that are not fixed. My preferences, I'm like 5 years ago, I wanted to become a doctor. Now I don't even take any form of sciences within school. We think your preferences aren't fixed, so you're likely to change what you want, and you're able to be a lot more malleable to your immediate needs and to your immediate preferences when you study a graduate model. Secondly, we think that you get a lot less monotony in the careers that you pursue because you're exposed to different roles. Within your workplace, you can pursue a different variety of different skills. So you're able to work in one different sector, like for one day, you're working in the more finance sector of your law firm, and the other day you're doing like historical references for a pro bono case, for example. The comparative is when you do undergraduate programs, you likely work in a very specialized unit. You work in the same place with the same people because your skills don't allow you to really exist alongside other people because you're not that useful because you don't really have other skills. So you think you're doing the same thing every day. Your life becomes a monotonous cog of doing the same thing over and over, pretty much very dehumanizing because you don't get that many other experiences. But thirdly, we think that you get a greater feeling of freedom because there's less risk for you to change. So you feel like if you do need to change, you have that ability to do it, but you also don't feel like you're a person that can only do one thing. This likely also has an impact of accountability because it's more easy for you to shift your career. So you can demand more from your employer. Thus, we think that we're a lot more better for career freedom. Panel is a very clear prop ballot.
Thank that speaker for the very fine speech. A reminder that speeches are up to 8:15. LO whenever you're ready.
All right, let me just get set up here. I think it's exceedingly uncharitable for Proposition to focus exclusively on jurisdictions where medical debt or just issues with paying for school doesn't exist. Clearly, we know that there are numerous jurisdictions around the world, like Canada, like the United States, like the United Kingdom, like Mexico, many places where there is a huge prohibitive cost to this system of graduate degrees that we stop. The biggest impact in this round, then, is making it far more accessible, ending shortages of professionals, and on that basis, we're very, very proud to oppose. In this speech, I want to clarify two pieces of broad strategic framing for this round. Firstly, around student debt. Secondly, around what these undergraduate degrees look like on proposition. Then I'm going to do a little bit of refutation before two arguments. Firstly, about why we decrease shortages of skilled professionals. Secondly, about why we have more effective professionals and public trust. To begin then, on the characterization, I just want to briefly extend what I told you in the intro, which is that medical debt and issues with all sorts of debt from law school or any fields are significant issues around the world. I think the intuition behind this is very simply, other than looking towards the examples, that it is a significant barrier to often pay for these kinds of education, and that often that tax-based governments have to convince everyone who votes for them that this is something worth doing. The problem is that democratic governments can often concede or almost entirely focus their kinds of campaign promises on their more wealthy donors. For example, there's a lot of wealthy capture of politics around the world. The issue is then that trying to convince your wealthy political donors that it is worth it to increase your tax money to pay for things like medical school or to pay for things like law school is incredibly unstrategic. This is because these people who are exceedingly rich can simply do not face these issues of their children needing to worry about whether they're going to pay for school. So the implication of this mechanism is that don't just buy the tit-for-tat example ping pong that I'm sure is going to come out where they talk about the EU and we talk about the US. We are the side that gives you the mechanism that explains why it's not politically advantageous to actually pay for these because your most rich donors don't face this issue. So I think that's a far better explanation about why medical debt is going to exist, why all of these forms of debt are going to exist, why they cannot fiat out the existence of debt through like student loans. Not at this time. Okay, The second piece of clarification I want to do is on the types of degrees that these people often pursue, because a significant amount of the proposition case is contingent upon them proving that these are actually going to be useful in the absence of the graduate degrees. I want to be very clear that when the info slide says that you first pursue a different field, this can be only a marginally different field on their side of the house, and this makes a lot of sense. So for example, in medical schools, you often have to do a
Why?
prior degree. No, I will take you after this argument. In medical school, you often have to take a prior degree in something like biology or in microbiology or like chemistry or something that's related to these fields, simply because they want that requisite knowledge of science. So you have to do something that's relatively similar. For law school, there are extreme limits upon what kinds of different degrees that you can have, for the very intuitive reason that there is a great deal of competition in terms of grades. So you have to choose majors that you actually have a good chance of getting higher grades in. That's why a lot of people choose things like political sciences. So even if there isn't a strict requirement in law, there is still a selection process by which you have to choose degrees that are going to be from a very small handful of professions, that don't just get to be this big diversity that they talk about. So with that framing out of the way, I want to address most of the claims you heard of the first proposition speech. The first thing they talk about is workforce quality. And essentially, their greatest and biggest mech here is that globalization exists, therefore people have to know more things. I'd say that trivially, an undergraduate degree probably isn't the best way to do this, and I'll flip it in my second argument where I talk about why, like, minorities, for example, being doctors is a better way to give this then they're like going over academization of this. But secondly, they say that AI replaces a whole bunch of jobs. I'll just note everything in that is entirely speculative to a huge degree. I don't think that's a major part of this debate. All of their things about critical thinking, similarly, I'm unclear about why an undergraduate degree. I said after my first argument, we'll do this. Okay, so on to their second argument, which is job security. The problem with this argument is, again, it's highly contingent upon you believing that AI is going to replace jobs. This is very speculative. I'd love them to run like 8 minutes of super technical mechanisms in second about why this is likely, but I don't think that's strategic for them. So given that, I think the second argument doesn't make a lot of sense. The final thing they say, though, is that it's very good because you're able to be more fulfilled. The broad problem with this is that the implication of my framing, which is that there's only a very limited amount of fields that you can realistically pursue. So for that very reason, if you are going to be going into this area anyways, the limits that exist in med school, the limits that exist in law, limit you severely so you don't get more passions or interests. The final thing they say is you're going to work more fulfilling jobs on the very simple basis that because you have more knowledge, you can jump from like the finance to the law wing of the company. This is ludicrous. Their own characterization and the underlying characterization of this whole round is that the economy is becoming more specialized. So the econ wings of companies are filled with people with master's degrees, not undergraduate degrees. The whole point of having a graduate model is that you become more specialized. So clearly that need exists, and it doesn't make sense that you could, with your undergraduate degree, go and do all of these different jobs. That was a ludicrous characterization. Okay. First argument on reducing shortages of professionals. So in a significant number of jurisdictions around the world, there are shortages of professionals from medical students to lawyers. We solve this by allowing more people who want to enter these professional fields to access necessary education who are currently shut out by prohibitive costs. The biggest barrier to people entering the field on prop is that there is an extremely long period of time during which people are spending tons and tons of money on tuition without the time to earn a sustainable income. So notably, student loans aren't sufficient for the reason I explained to you. But I'll add one more mechanism, which is that debt is massive and interest is bad, and you worry every single day that you might not be able to finish school. So the intuition that explains why people are averse to debt is that many people, for example, could buy a house but continue to rent because they're scared of the mortgage and the risk that they will default. So debt is incredibly scary. Student loans aren't sufficient. They can't fiat that this payment doesn't exist. So this creates a huge deterrence because the average individual cannot pay for 7+ years before they enter the field, and they will have no money in the short term and can't afford basic costs. So maybe they can afford tuition, but then they literally can't feed themselves because, for example, they can't work a job at the same time as med school. Now, there's a great analogy for this too, which is that the reason why many poorer people in rural areas don't go to university isn't because they're stupid or don't want a higher paying job. It's because they immediately need income. And so they work part-time jobs or lower fields. So when they say that, oh, all of these workers who are cost prohibitive, they're going to go into trade schools. The reason they are forced to go into trade schools is because they don't have the accessibility to go to these higher forms of education. So the impacts of this are very simple. When you reduce to 3 or 4 years on our side of the house, it allows for faster entry, which significantly reduces the barrier. So it's like half as less of a cost because there's a 4-year difference. We know that this 10 to 8 year thing is like asserted. We think the vast majority of undergraduate degrees are like 4 years, for example, but then you add a whole other 4 years of medical school on top of that. So we probably probably half the amount of time you have to spend in school, we half the amount of time of money. So there are two impacts. Firstly,
Point.
on the principle, it's not fair that rich people have more access to become these kinds of professionals. But then, secondly, we'd say that you just reduce the shortages because there are more of them. Very briefly, and I'm sorry that it's over time in terms of protected, but we have more effective professionals and professional trust. Proposition said it's great that if you have a semi-diverse background in econ. I think the far greater priority is that when police often beat up, for example, or law establishments are racist against certain groups of people, or when traditionally medical institutions have performed experiments on indigenous or black people such that they don't trust the system. This is what prevents people from, for example, accessing lawyers because they don't trust or they think the system is against them, or they don't access medical school because they don't see people who look like them. That is to say that the broad public doesn't have faith in these professional institutions because they don't see people who look like them. We would say at the point to which we increase a level of accessibility, that people from wider backgrounds with this knowledge come in. So you have lawyers who know what it's like to deal with racism at an institutionalized level. Same thing, you have doctors. For that reason, we increase public trust. That's a far better way to improve our professions. Very proud to propose.
I thank you for that wonderful speech. Deeply motivating.
Just checking that I'm audible.
If you are.
Okay, perfect. I similarly cannot turn on my camera because of connectivity issues. Please. Okay, cool. Just getting my timer. Okay, I'll calm myself down then. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. It's weird that the opposition try and frame us out by saying that you can't actually get the versatility that we supposedly claim because graduate degrees require you to do something similar. So if you're studying biology in your undergrad, you have to study microbiology in your graduate degree, and therefore we supposedly can't get those benefits. But what they uniquely ignore about our case is the need and necessity for specialization in the modern working era. Because we think even if you have to do something that's similar to your undergrad degree on our side, that's still good because it allows you to specialize more in that field, which gives you as an individual a competitive edge against other employees that companies are looking for. Because we think a company like a hospital would much rather hire like a cardiologist than just a general practitioner, because that cardiologist has the knowledge of the general practitioner and has additional knowledge on how to do like heart surgery. We think specialization is what gets the competitive edge and what's get people jobs. 2 questions I'm going to be answering. Firstly, which side is better for job security and the workforce? Secondly, which side is better for the fulfillment of the individuals? Then you'll get an argument on why our side improves academia. Let's talk job security. We told you that companies favor individuals with specialized and diverse skills. 1, because more niche industries have been emerging, such as AI, so you need more niche individuals. But 2, because in order for companies to gain a competitive edge, they want to remain more distinct. What did they tell us under this clash in response and in counter to this? The first thing they say is that people need immediate sources of income, and therefore they can't do a graduate degree. They need to get into the workforce immediately because they don't have a lot of money. 3 responses to this idea. 1, we think the individuals who need immediate sources of income probably don't go to university in the first place, but rather just opt into the labor force from the get-go because they don't have income like they claim. So we think on either side, these individuals aren't going to be doing an undergraduate, nor are they going to be doing a graduate because, like they say, these people are desperate for income. But secondly, we think you can still make money on our side while studying. So you can do things like during your postgraduate, you can do paid internships that were based on your undergraduate and still make money from your undergraduate while you're studying your graduate. And that's literally what our case aims to prove to you, that you can use the skills of your undergraduate, and in addition to that, after studying, you can use your skills from your graduate degree. But moreover, you can just do things like side jobs. But thirdly, we think that people in the most destitute conditions that don't have a lot of money like they claim likely opt into the cheapest degrees on either side, such as humanities degrees, which aren't favored heavily in society. Therefore, these people people are already in a bad position on opposition side because they don't pursue highly favored degrees in the first place, degrees that don't have a lot of expertise, degrees that companies don't favor. So we think people in the most financially destitute conditions on opposition side will likely study the cheapest degrees, will likely study the cheapest undergraduates, and they won't get the necessary skills and qualifications that companies favor in the first place, which means that at best this harm is symmetric, and none of the benefits that they talk about helping financially unstable individuals manifest on their side because the undergraduates that those individuals study on their side aren't degrees like medicine, because that's just extremely expensive. Second clash then on which side just gets a better workforce. We told you we're better because you get a greater knowledge base within companies, which is important in making more holistic decisions within companies. But secondly, that we get greater resource sharing, because now when you have an undergrad and a graduate, you have more knowledge to share to your employees. You can train people, you can train interns. What did they tell us under this clash? They say that debt is incurred, and they specifically give us the structural reason that governments can't cancel debt because in order to raise taxes, your rich donors won't like that and therefore they'll lobby against it. Aside from the fact that this is a very US-centric example, like lobbying isn't just that big of an issue outside of the world, I'll still engage with this. One, we think that governments do have an incentive to advocate for things like debt cancellation and student debt cancellation because that appeals to the masses and gets them a strong voter base. Like the biggest thing that Joe Biden is known for was his major economic policy of canceling all debt for students, because they give the example of Democrats. Like Democrats were known for literally canceling student debt. We think the analysis is counterproductive. They say you won't do it because of rich donors. We think at the end of the day, rich donors don't matter if you can't get a voter base. We get that on our side. But secondly, our case is simply analytically prior to theirs, because in order to weather against the harms of debt, you need job security in the first place. But job security only happens on our side when we have specialization and we have diversification. Therefore, even in our worst case where people incur debt, we think in the long term, they're still economically better off because they can at least weather against that debt because they actually have a job. On their side, people have to enter oversaturated markets and they're unable to get jobs in the first place because they don't have additional skills that give them a competitive edge to be getting that job in the first place. Final clash then on fulfillment. Daniel gave you a very nice argument on why, one, people are not pigeonholed on our side, but secondly, you feel a greater sense of freedom. O1, in the last 10 seconds of their speech, tell us that racist institutions exist and their side somehow infiltrates those racist institutions by giving access to minorities. But we think the only way to create change is through having professional individuals within those institutions who have specialized skills, i.e. having specialized people of color within that institution. Because we think getting a low undergraduate degree won't allow you to get a high-ranking position in a company, won't allow you to get a high-ranking position within that institution. So if you just get a basic law degree, you aren't going to be able to create systemic change as a person of color. However, on our side, when you specialize and you get a more significant and unique degree, as a person of color, you can get more jobs that have political and social capital and subsequently make more social change. I.e., would you make more social change as a general practitioner or as the leading neurologist in a hospital, as the first woman or a person of color neurologist in that hospital? We think that change likely exists greater on our side when you actually are more specialized in that regard. Before my argument on why our side improves academia, yes.
So this job market is not one person with an undergraduate degree going against several other people that don't have undergraduate systems. Presumably the job market is going to reflect similar educational backgrounds across different people applying for the same job. So isn't it then unlikely that you're going to have this competitive advantage on your side?
No. You're not understanding. This is about people with professional licenses. So we think, like you claim, that if you have to go from a biology degree and then a microbiology degree on our side, you're going to favor the person who has a degree in biology and microbiology. That's what our case aims to prove to you. Because although two people with biology degrees are competing against each other, it's the one who has more specialized skills. Why do we improve academia on our side? Firstly, we likely get more people to opt into academia on our side. And this is because when the option to study more than one course that you've already done exists, more people have a greater incentive to opt into studying and to opt into university because they know that additional options exist. So they know that if I regret doing my undergraduate, I can always do a graduate in a different course, but moreover, I can just specialize and fulfill my desire in that specific course by doing the graduate even more. Comparatively, we think only having an undergraduate means you have less opt-in into academia because individuals' options are more stripped away from them. Why then is opt-in important within the system? Because one, it means you have more minds to contribute to things like research, but two, education becomes cheaper on our side due to economies of scale. As universities have more customers, therefore they can just make things cheaper when more people are opting into more degrees. But lastly, our side just makes better research from universities. And this is because in order for universities to conduct effective research, they need individuals with diverse and specialized skills who understand the topics well. I.e., if you have a degree in biology, you're unable to research microbiology. It's only through having both those degrees that you're able to research that specific type of thing. Note that's impactful because having more specialized research from universities is good because universities form the basis of academia. So if universities can release more research and publish more papers, it means that they're better overall and academia is better overall. Thank you.
Well, I think that speaker did a very fine speech.
Hi there. Could I be heard and seen? Wonderful. Time begins on my first word, and I'll take POYs verbally. I don't know what world proposition lives in because you don't learn specialist degrees in undergraduate school. You don't learn how to be a cardiologist as an undergraduate. You learn that when you declare your focus in med school. And strategically, if you were learning so specialized skills in undergraduate degree, that contradicts the transferability of skills that P1 wants to harp on when AI comes to take your job. So already they have case tensions all throughout their case. Firstly, let's deal with the proposition framing that they give. They first say that debt isn't an issue because this debate takes place in the world and undergraduate degrees are lengthened to match the length of a graduate and undergraduate degree on their side. This framing assumes what you learn in an undergraduate degree is necessary for being a professional. On our side, we presumably weed out all useless undergraduate curriculum. So if you want to be a doctor and a biochemistry degree isn't useful to being a doctor, our side removes that biochemistry degree as a prerequisite to even apply for med school and rather allows students to apply for med school directly from high school. So that's the difference between both sides of the house. I don't think proposition declined it clearly. But secondly, even if this debate doesn't only take place in the US, student loan costs and education costs are universal. So even if they aren't as costly, the point is that you're still being required to pay for more things that aren't pertinent to your degree in a professional setting. This is why debt is still a comparable problem that's important. Second, let's frame out specialization. You can still specialize on our side because on our side, if you were to go to med school, not only would you do that as an undergraduate, but you would also declare what you wanted to be as a doctor. Would you be a family doctor, a cardiologist, or a surgeon? Those are still things you can degree and specialize in, so it's not clear why specialization is unique to their side. First question about the preparation of a professional. They first say that you have a better quality of workforce because you learn broad sets of skills that help you set up for industry fluctuations. I want to point out two reasons for why this is not true. Number one, students on our side can still take different undergraduate courses as well. So they can take med school and law school from high school. Given I already proved that these are still shorter than taking graduate course tracks for each, that means we can still equally match their benefit and help against industry fluctuations by teaching our students a variety of skills. But the second thing is really important, and I want to flip their claim, right? If it's true that AI is going to take your job, would you rather live in a world where you entered that job and entered preparing for that job from high school, or would you do that when you're much older and you've already completed your undergraduate degree? It seems to me that it's actually far worse on their side of the house, because if you take 7 years worth of education to be a doctor, and while you're applying to med school, you see AI take your job as a doctor, it's too late for you to switch degrees, and you've already completed the undergraduate curriculum necessary for med school. But on our side, if it's the case that you pulled less to begin with because you were studying for med school right out of high school, clearly it's more transferable because you waste less resources to begin with, which is why on our side, it's actually far better for you to change and weather against industry fluctuations. The second thing they say is that they say you know more because you can put your history degree to use as a lawyer, or you can put your biochemistry degree to use as a doctor. Here's the problem. I question this on face, and I don't see the degree of the impact. Given they don't point out the degree to which you can use your undergraduate degree and how useful it is in a professional setting, it's not clear why this is a necessary impact. And additionally, they don't prove out why you need the 4 years of expertise necessary to develop it to a good skill. So it's not clear as to why, for instance, if I want to be a lawyer and I want to be, quote, specialized, why I have to go through 4 years as a history degree major necessary to actually accomplish that goal. Why can't I learn it through Khan Academy, for instance? It's not clear as to why they say the 4 years through undergraduate degrees are such a big benefit towards being, quote, specialized in their fields. But the second problem and the better response is that this is just excessive, right? 4 years is unnecessary given how many people might not actually use their history degree in a law setting, how few people might actually use their biochemistry degree in like a dental setting, for instance. We think if you're studying to go to dental school, our point was that you didn't need to learn the body systems of how like muscles worked in your legs, right? But that's what on proposition they force you to do, which is the difference between our side and their side. What did Liam say under this theme and why is it so important? Number one, we pointed out that we have more professionals working on our side because poor groups are not as deterred from paying for education. They say two things. One, these poor groups would ignore university entirely and opt into the workforce straight out of high school. This ignores the nuance of our argument because our argument was that it was comparatively easier for you to go to an undergraduate degree and go into a professional setting on our side than it is their side. If anything, these poor groups are actually going to be more deterred on their side than comparatively on our side, where they realize that you have to put in less resources to go to med school and become a doctor on our side than on their side. So in anything, this ignores the nuance of an argument is just dismissive. Secondly, they say you can still get paid internships.
Here
This is
why.
blatantly false, and I want to emphasize this a lot. The reason why you can't get paid internships on their side is because in order for you to even qualify for an internship, you need to be in med school because it is seen as necessary. On our side, if taking an undergraduate school in like med is all that's seen as enough, you get comparatively more paid internships available to on our side. Our point was that where you suffer isn't in med school. Our point was where you were suffering was when you were paying absurd amounts of money in undergraduate schools to produce and learn a degree that wasn't even useful towards your education. That's when you suffered because you couldn't even get internships pertinent towards your degree and what you wanted to do in a professional setting, which is why ultimately on their side, it's far worse for poor students. Here's why this argument is important. If anything, the industry fluctuation they say is a problem is most likely to be local and not global. It looks like vast arrays of doctors leaving Canada because of wage issues. It looks like a vast array of lawyers leaving Europe to go to firms in the US for better pay. In these regional areas, you see big shortage and many industries internationally are left crippled. But on our side, we fix this issue. So where I come from in Calgary, right? If a lot of
Here why.
doctors leave, we don't have to wait 7 years on proposition side of the house for replacement doctors to come. We can wait 4 years and that's comparatively better. The second theme is about the preparation for quality and education, but before I begin, I'll take POI if there is one.
Your case agrees and concedes that people need specialization to enter these markets. Thus, you're not actually defending an undergraduate market. You are defending people doing specialized undergraduate degrees and then further specialized postgraduate degrees.
So you have a misconception of this round, right? If you want to be a doctor on our side, you learn all the skills in med school in your undergraduate degree. That's what happens on our side. But on your side, in order for you to be a doctor, not only would you have to learn biochemistry, but you would also then apply to med school. And it's at that point when you're like 24 where you start learning to be a doctor. So the timeline is different, but what you learn on our side and your side is still the same fundamentally in undergraduate and graduate schools. Right. Let's talk about the preparation of the quality of education. And right off the bat, I want to give the third argument about resource waste. What undergraduates learn in an undergraduate degree is not useful for professional fields and is often a waste of money and time. Many undergraduate degrees are only taken as prerequisites for the graduate schools, but what is learned is not transferable in a professional field. The first reason I want to point this out is that undergraduate degrees are rarely transferable into professional skills, and this deals with the specialization arguments that you get from proposition. And the reason why, strategically, is because graduate schools accept a variety of undergraduate degrees, right? So med school would accept undergraduate degrees in biochemistry, nursing, or health sciences, or the variety of pre-law degrees like IR or political science, all lead you to law school anyways. And what that means then is that no undergraduate degree is a necessary prerequisite for graduate schools and is therefore clearly not transferable. But also, there are arguments on like being able to weather against AI also require you to assume that broad skills are being taught that are transferable, so their arguments concede to this addition. So this is bad because many undergraduate degrees then are now going to be useless when you're taking them into a professional setting. And this is terrible because a lot of undergraduate degrees are publicly funded by the government. So if the government on their side is wasting money to build teachers and provide professors that know a lot about biochemistry, but don't teach you to be a doctor, what's the use, you know? So it's clearly not true it's clearly not true that you get a good use of resources. On their side, they do the opposite. Ultimately, proposition gives us a case full of case tensions and contradictions. It's for those reasons I'm proud to oppose.
Thank you, Dilo, for the great speech.
I'm just gonna run and grab some water. I'll be like 30 seconds, sorry. Cool. He, him, Brendan. Just very specifically, POIs in the chat, please. Cool. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. At the most basic level, school is something that allows individuals opportunity to exist in the real world, to experience individuals' lives from multiple perspectives, to interact with multitudes of peers, and to be able to network with peers in broad bases so that they can figure out who they are and decide later. Education from jump doesn't tell individuals that because of arbitrary parenthood, you ought to exist in one career. We think, in the same vein, because of arbitrary economic or market factors now, individuals shouldn't base decisions on education and specialize immediately. We need flexibility because individuals are uncertain, and it's much better to be able to switch as opposed to doing 3 years of law and then realizing that you made a mistake and now you have to switch and you're a massive amount of money in the hole. A few things I'm going to do. Firstly, I'm going to bring some clarity in terms of the setup of this debate. 3 things. Firstly, this is a debate about the kind of education people get on each side. On our side, we'd say that we want diverse education at a base where individuals not only learn the job that they are aiming to get into, but learn skills. Those skills later transfer, as Amir mentions in his speech, to things like an intellectual curiosity. So moving on to specialize in a master's, therefore being more specialized in a field and more able to deal with the circumstances in the field. This wasn't a case tension. This was nuance as to why we get masters and higher levels of study on our side. Comparatively on their side, as we said from the first second of Daniel's speech, they create workers who want to create labor as opposed to generally being able to be intellectually curious and that kind of thing. Few things then as to why diversity is important. 1, individuals don't know their passion, so they speculate about it. 2, individuals can't read things like market forces. So a decision to specialize early is one that individuals cannot fully consent to because they aren't fully informed about it. So they coerce individuals on our side. Thirdly, though, some careers fluctuate massively with population. They create massive economic drain on their side as well, just based off context, because they have things like Australia's OT crisis, where they have very few people in a certain career, and they have limited capacity to adapt to that. Notably, this is a This House prefers motion, so when I go through my analysis of clashes, bear in mind that this is about creating a new way education has existed from the beginning of time. So discussions about market forces and very strict institutions aren't always in place, because our world is likely to be one where education is more fluid and individuals adapt to different roles in the workplace, i.e. being a secretary one day and a paralegal the next. We give individuals more capacity to escape the monotony of capitalism in that instance as well. This context was important because it illustrated that diversity is crucial to individuals, independent of their class, based on how education ought to exist in its role of informing individuals. 2 clashes then. Firstly, let's talk about the nature of entry into university and work. This is important because a lot of their benefits are centered around alleviation of poverty and access for individuals in less developed countries. I want to know 2 things about why this is a strategically strange line to take. The first is to say that these are very marginal instances, i.e. these are instances where individuals have enough money to pursue university, but don't necessarily have enough money to pursue a long-term degree. This is a difference of 2 years in terms of funding that people can access. We already wait that we're able to deal with that, given that we probably get higher paying jobs on our side. Secondly, this is quite strange, given that these instances are only ones where individuals are certain about the kind of degree they want to choose. We just broadly say that no one predicts market forces that well, and people are really uncertain. What did we give you here? We told you that we get more valuable labor in that it is collaborative, one that emphasizes critical thinking and able to adapt. This means the manner in which work exists is changed because individuals specialize more, engage with more broad education, specialize later after they've learned to do their job, and exist in a work environment that's fairly fluid. This is impactful because we get specialization to things like masters later on, but we also create individuals who are not just workers, but who have the autonomy to switch from company to company. Daniel's argument was especially impactful for two reasons. A, especially in crisis management, we're able to have broad contexts that are generally beneficial. In service areas like medicine, people are able to have more discussions and have more broad knowledge on issues as opposed to having to focus on the immediacy of an issue and call another specialist to help them. Secondly, though, we create global understanding for individuals. This preempts their entire argument on trust because individuals understand things like the socioeconomic circumstances of the people they've worked with, or they've worked with so many people that they understand a more diverse range of people, so trust is unlikely to be an issue on their side. In terms of direct response, Amir's already told you that this is largely unlikely to be an issue based on who actually enters into university. Even if it is, though, we're massively better for access to university. One, individuals are more likely to enter university on outside because of economies of scale and because there's more ability to not have to specialize soon. So people feel more comfortable in entering university because it's not a massive commitment. This is enormous in its impact because it means there are more individuals in classes. So classes become cheaper based on the fact that you need one professor for more learners. Professors can be less specialized because the content you are teaching isn't necessarily advanced to the highest degree, and you can have more classes. This vastly increases access on our side, so we're comparatively better for the access that they tell us about. This engages with access before it becomes a problem. Secondly, though, and this is perhaps the largest flaw in their case, they prioritize fast entry into industries that they have created that are massively competitive. I don't understand why entry into a career is especially fast if, as per their framing, you will be competing against Bill from Harvard in that career. Comparatively, we're better. A, because individuals can choose their careers based on new labor markets being present. So they don't have to fight pre-existing market forces that are now against them because 100 people in their year chose law and they're just not rich enough to be able to afford a degree from Harvard. But B, if individuals make a decision to drop out, on our side, individuals can drop out with experience from a general degree as opposed to having not finished a licensing degree and therefore just being unqualified and broadly useless to the workplace. Extraneously, we're probably also better prepared for fluctuation because people can switch earlier and prioritize earlier and specialize in careers later, so they can make decisions based on the newest information they have about the market and AI, as opposed to being stuck in a career forever. This is also impactful beyond the fact that we make sure that individuals are raised out of poverty, because on their side, they use individuals as a product to their labor, specifically, principally important here, for something that they are unable to reasonably consent to, i.e. people are unable to see the future and they force individuals into futures that are uncertain that they're unable to deal with. Even if this doesn't work, though, we create an environment of work that is better for the average individual. Two things on weighing here. One, more people are benefited because work is something that can be more flexible. So the average middle-class individual, a vastly larger number of people, are benefited on our side. Secondly, though, work is more exciting, so people are probably more productive. That generates economic output, which also helps issues with poverty. This is an important clash because we protect people that they prioritize. Before I chat about the second clash, POI.
Okay. This motion is about licensed degrees, of which there are far and few between. It's things like only dentistry, law, or med school. The notion that market forces significantly affect this at all is ludicrous. None of your characterization about specialization works because it doesn't matter if your history degree is useful in law school.
Are you kidding? There's AI legislation being formed now. OT and new medical fields happen as more and more people get diagnosed with more mental health diseases. This changes all the time and fluctuates massively, especially even if that doesn't exist, though, we get more intellectually curious people. So we find new fields that are beneficial. Lastly, a small clash happened on things like quality of education. We've already told you that job security is massively impactful here because individuals are able to feel non-pigeonholed and able to have the liberation and autonomy over their career. I don't think translation of skills is an issue. One, because we get perspective, and two, because we get networking of individuals. So you can transfer your skills a ton because you know more people and are able to engage with more diverse perspectives. We weigh more here. One, because we give fulfillment for individuals. So we limit the capacity for them to be stuck in capitalist engagement because their best case and the end of their case is bringing poor people into the monotony of capitalism, and that's not something we'd support. We liberate individuals through education instead of using education as an oppressive tool to shut down their creativity.
I thank the government for that wonderful speech and to wrap up the constructive part of this debate.
Okay, perfect. Any POIs are fine. If I don't like get to you, maybe just like unmute and say POI. Doesn't really matter. Am I missing anything? Oh, she, her pronouns. Yeah, okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The characterization we get out of proposition arguing that the purpose of educational institutions is for the intellectually curious is a highly unrealistic characterization. Perhaps in an ideal world that is completely post-materialist, this can actually be true. But in terms of what the world actually looks like, none of their content is grounded in reality. I'm incredibly proud to oppose. I want to chat about 2 themes in this speech. The first is going to be on accessibility, and the second is going to be on the quality of education. But before that, there's a major clarification that I need to make here. What proposition misses is that the crux of post-secondary education does not solely revolve around these highly specialized degrees, right? So presumably, there are degrees outside of medicine or law or therapy or these very typically would be like grad schools that people that are intellectually curious can explore on their side of the house. So if they're actually curious about exploring life's fallacies or like philosophy or whatever, they can take those undergrad majors instead or major in other things that will help enhance their learning in that way. What Nathan and Liam told you was incredibly important here. The type of students that are likely to enter these specific majors, which this debate is actually about, are people that are trying to enter a career.
POI.
Trying to become lawyers, doctors, or therapists, or whatever it is in the info slide, or whatever school they are trying to actually go to. So it is unrealistic for them to characterize the type of student in these fields as people that are solely learning based on the premise of intellectual curiosity. And rather what we tell you is that the priority here is money and being able to enter a career. I'm going to talk about my first theme, and I'll take your POI after I finish that. Let's talk about accessibility then. What Liam told you is that you have more people entering the skilled workforce for 2 reasons. Firstly, there is the idea of cost barriers decreasing, right? And their response here was that, to my POI and to Liam's argument, was that people that need immediate income are likely to go to trade school. And they try to characterize our characterization as a minority of cases. But look, it is so simple. There are so many people who can afford undergrad that then do not take on the extra cost of graduate school because those 2 years are actually very expensive and more expensive than undergrad. And people that do try to take them on often have to have very large amounts of years in between undergrad and graduate school where they're trying to raise money for grad school in the first place. And so this cost barrier is actually extremely significant on our side. And I think it was very uncharitable for them to try to say otherwise. But secondly, even if you do not believe this, although we've already given you several reasons why this debt is a significant problem, we say that this time barrier actually confounds the ability to overcome the barrier of cost on our side. Because you are spending less time in education, this means that it takes less time for you to actually start earning income on our side. And so many people then are able to actually join these because the economic investment in their education has benefits that come more quickly on our side than on their side. Even if that difference is 2 or 3 years only, we would say that that is still significant enough for several people to then join the industry and thus be able to help with the idea of accessibility. And what they tried to tell you in response here was, hey, we get economies of scale because there's less commitment in university, so people will therefore have cheaper tuitions because more people go because they're exploring. Look, this is incredibly unclear to me. What Liam told you in the POI was that there are other majors in the, there are other college majors that people will go to that presumably fund the same institutions or that presumably, will help with that whole issue of less commitment. So if the actors that they are talking about that cause this economy of scale is really just interested in learning or exploring or not being committed, they're likely not to enter these fields in the first place and probably will fund different industries or different sectors. But moving on then. When they tried to, what Liam's impacts were twofold. Firstly, that you are filling a desperate shortage of specialized workers. And I want to flag this. This is very important and will notably help me refute their argument on job security. But secondly, you get more trust in institutions because you have people from different areas working in these programs, people from more rural communities or people coming from lower income backgrounds. And their response, basically was the crux of our case, right? Saying that, hey, this is unlikely because they are not going to be able to afford to enter the industry. Well, on our side, that becomes more of a possibility because on the comparison, it is literally cheaper to enter. This is a very intuitive case. But then they talk to us about job security. And what they tell you is that, hey, if your sector doesn't work out for you, at least you can shift to somewhere else, right? I think, first of all, this is a very unrealistic characterization.
Speaker.
I'll take you in a minute, but we think that like realistically, if you were going to specialize in medicine, the undergrad major you are likely to choose is probably going to have a similar sector. So if this like wiping out of a sector is as severe as they characterize it, it's probably still very difficult for this person to find a job on their side as well. But secondly, contextually, these jobs that require this extensive education is likely to have a shortage of these jobs fulfilled in the first place, right? Like proposition never grounded this argument in reality, but the fact of the matter is that in most countries there's a shortage of doctors, or in most countries there aren't enough people working in courts or criminal justice systems or whatever. And so we think it is very unrealistic to say that these jobs are going to become obsolete very soon, and we think this is like very unrealistic. But regardless, let's say suddenly this does happen. The undergrad is not 4 years of general education. Presumably it is still broadly specialized to enough of an extent that it's hard to just take that and move it to a completely different sector. And so the sector that you are in is still going to be affected by this change in economy. This is also like a highly speculative claim, right? They themselves say in their first speech that, hey, maybe AI will wipe out human existence. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough of a reason for us to base this entire case on, and so they've already lost on that theme. Before I move on to my second, I'll take your POI.
On our side, careers are less set, so people only enter into courses for passion and potential and move into service later as a result of exploring their identity as opposed to just because they exist in a certain cultural group.
Sorry. So again, this is a very post-materialist claim, right? Many people do not have the ability to prioritize their passions or prioritize like their intellectual curiosity in education, but rather the purpose of them like pursuing education in the first place is so that they can establish a career where they can generate enough money to put food on the table. And that is the biggest priority for the most important actors in this debate, where you're likely to get any actual margin of change where more people are entering the industry. Okay. On quality of education very quickly then. Nathan told you 3 reasons why their idea of like extra specialization wasn't true. Firstly, much of this material is irrelevant. He told you that what you are learning often is going to retain irrelevant information, right? If you are trying to become a dentist, it's unclear why you need to know like the majority of human anatomy to be able to supplement that. And note that what they try to tell you is that because of globalization, you need to know different things to supplement like your position now. But what we tell you is that you are likely to learn those things outside of school. It is things like reading the news, or it is things like interacting with others, which notably Liam also told you we get to more of an extent on our side. What Nathan also told you though was that this is more pay to play than actually being able to supplement learning. It is not based on meritocratic standards, but rather it is based on whoever can actually afford to enter the schools on their side. And thirdly, like this qualification or job market thing is quite a ridiculous claim to like make, right? Because presumably this is not a case-by-case basis. This debate is not occurring through one person choosing which type of education system to follow, but rather it is on net which one is better. So the job market idea of having this competitive advantage makes no sense here. I tried to bring this up in a POI and I think they completely misinterpreted it. But basically, if the system as a whole follows a system of graduate and undergraduate, then presumably everyone also has an undergraduate degree who is applying to that job. So you don't actually have that competitive advantage because people have the same educational background as you. This is why that entire idea of specialization doesn't exist on their side, but they do concede its importance, which ultimately loses them that debate because it is clear on our side that specialization is better. I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank the off-whip for that great speech and all constructive speakers in the constructive part of the debate.
Can it be heard and seen again?
Yep.
Wonderful. At the top of this speech, I want to point out the characterization down the prop bench. On the one hand, in P1, this education learned in undergraduate degrees, like your history degree, are useful enough to help you plenty as you enter your job as a lawyer and graduate from graduate school. On the other hand, though, in P3, this education learned in undergraduate degrees is also broad enough that you can easily diversify your profession and switch majors entirely. If it is the case that your major is so broad, how much it would help you in graduate school while you're specializing in some other major is unclear. But given they pivot entirely on supporting the broadness of undergraduate degrees, and third, let's deal with this characterization in two questions. Number one, which side helps prepare students better for the professional setting? So their major claim at the end of P3 is that their major focus is the adaptability that you can get from an undergraduate degree, that you aren't as pressured to declare a major, which leads you able to enter into the university to begin with. Firstly, I think they widely mischaracterize undergraduate degrees on our side, right? So on our side, most med school majors don't even specialize in their first year anyways. Sure, you still learn some general practitionum, but the point is that you still specialize at the end of your studies in med school. You didn't have to specialize immediately, but you could specialize in your second or third year while still learning and deciding which major or which specialization was good for you. And so what that ultimately meant was that you still have some degree of freedom on our side of the house, so you aren't as pressured to make a decision to begin with, which is what P3 wanted to characterize. Secondly, how big of a claim of not being pressured, I don't see, right? So you can still also find this interest in high school. It's not clear as to why the 4 years you needed was necessary for you to find that interest and why you had to mandate everyone to find this 4 years, right? Worst case scenario, if someone didn't like doing med and they were the first 2 years of studying med school in our side of the house, they could switch to law school. But on their side of the house, if all you learn in med school is once you complete your prerequisite courses in biochemistry and then you figure out you didn't want to do med, well, you're screwed because then you have to go through 4 years of doing a pre-log track before you can get back on finding your passion. The point was on our side that the opt-out mechanism was far easier. The fact that you didn't put much in to go into med school or go into law school meant that you can easily pull out of law school or med school if you didn't feel like that was for you. But on their side, the harm is way greater, right? The fact that when you're in med school and you decide to pull out, then you have to go through another 4 years of finding an undergraduate degree before you could go into law school. The second thing they say is industry fluctuations, right? And they still don't respond to the industry fluctuation flip I delivered in second, which is that on their side, you're putting in more comparatively, which means then that it's harder for you to pull out if things like AI happen. But additionally, let's go into weighing, right? The greatest industry fluctuation is probably going to be brain drain in the next several years. It's when doctors in Canada leave, and all of a sudden you see a massive shortage in the amount of available doctors in your area. Our point was that on our side, it only took 4 years for you to see a replacement doctor. But on their side, it took 7. And I don't care how long it takes for you to get a quote specialized degree if you want to give that a claim, right? On our side, you still have on their side, you have 3 extra years, or you see hospitals being crippled, and you don't see a lot of replacement happening. But secondly, which side improves the professional setting more, right? I want to give a bunch of material that Liam introduced at first and still wasn't properly refuted with. The first thing we pointed out was that at the very least, we see more low-income people participating in university. Then on their side, the opportunity cost is so much greater if you have to pay double the amount of student loans to begin with. And they still haven't dealt with the nuance of our claim, which is that it was comparatively easier to pay one student loan as opposed to two on their side. We have to do 4 years in undergraduate and 3 years in graduate school, which they themselves concede. On our side, even if you're only doing 5 or 6 years, that's still much better than the 8 years or 5 years or 7 years you do on their side, which is why people aren't as deterred on our side. In other words, why we also get people on our side. But additionally, Liam also pointed out, and this wasn't mentioned with, right? On our side, people see an incentive to go to university because once you graduate from university on our side, you enter the workforce. On their side, if you have to do 3 more years of education before you can enter the workforce, the appeal isn't that great. So if anything, people on their side are the ones who are stuck in small pay jobs without entering the professional field. It's for all of those reasons, we see more doctors, we see more lawyers on our side of the house. We're very, very proud to oppose.
I think the reply very much for that speech.
Cool, just confirming that I'm audible.
Yeah, you're
Just give me 2 seconds and I'll count myself in when I'm ready. Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Opposition is losing because they misunderstand the motion, because they aren't actually arguing for undergraduate degrees, they're arguing for double specializations. Because note, in an undergraduate program, you don't study in those 6 years to become a general doctor and a cardiologist. You often have to study another 4 years to get that cardiology specialization. So the problem is that they push you even further down one degree of specialization where you don't have greater options to even change. So everything they're saying here is pretty much symmetric about you being able to opt out more. But the difference is that we told you that undergraduate degrees and more general programs you do before you do in a graduate program means that you have a greater variety of skills. So even if you drop out, speaking about, they're very poor people that they care about the most in this debate. If you drop out, you have skills. It's not about the end of a degree getting a license, and that is what means that you have value. The fact that you did a general degree means that you have skills in critical thinking, skills in collaboration. Notably, panel, they didn't actually engage with the important framing I told you in P1. They simply just ran a case that maybe would have worked in 2015. Because we told you that it's very important for people to have these forms of soft skills, because technological advancements means that hard skills are able to be easily replaced. Someone like an ENT is very easy to replace by taking a photo of someone's throat and then deciding what is the best form of treatment. It looks like in South Africa, many doctors losing their jobs because rural doctors are now being replaced with AI prescription machines where people can submit their symptoms and then they get prescriptions out of this. We think that these types of developments are happening within 1 year of AI really becoming an important thing. It's not really speculative to say that it's pretty likely that within 5 years, AI is likely to be able to replace the vast majority of skills that people are doing, especially with recent developments of things like DeepSeek, where it's just really cheap now to develop AI and stuff like that. Cool. Now that we've actually contextualized this motion and understood where we're standing, let's deal with their biggest claim about access. We told you several responses. Firstly, it's very marginal, because at best it's just 2 extra years doing it, because in their world they do 6 years of med school, and then versus ours, well, we do 8 years probably. But the difference is their world still wants you to become a cardiologist, so you probably do even more. But notably, this just isn't the motion. They're just really weird and confused. But secondly, we told you that it's easier for you to actually fund yourself and develop more, because when you study a general degree, it's easy for you to get hired for things like freelance jobs and stuff like that, because you have a variety of skills that aren't really just for one specific sector. So you're able to be employed for more low-skilled labor, so you can actually afford to further your specialization. So if they think that you need to reach the absolute peaks of specialization, when you're able to accumulate more skills over and over, you're able to afford and able to enter more different types of jobs to do it. Secondly, they didn't actually respond to our economies of scale job, because we told you if we're able to make it much more accessible and a lot easier and a lot less scary for people to enter university, it's likely to be cheaper. We are then winning because we proved to you that we actually get it cheaper. But moreover, we think master's degrees are a lot more expensive than doing a graduate program, because you need higher level professors, as well as governments don't really subsidize master's degree programs, because very few people actually do it in the status quo, so it doesn't get them the political stuff. We told you this literally from my first speech. But let's bite their bullet and say that it is so expensive. We think that if it is so expensive, you probably shouldn't do the degree. Note, this may sound counterintuitive, but the problem is that if you cannot afford it in the beginning and it's very difficult, you have a very high rate of you not being able to complete your degree because of financial problems. The problem is when you're just trying to pursue a license and you don't get the license, all the skills you've acquired become very useless and redundant. Whereas the skills you're able to acquire from general degrees that focus on teaching people skills and general applicable principles is likely, so if you don't complete it, you're able to still have some form of value within the workplace. Lastly, let's just evaluate employability and who gets better employability. Note, they didn't actually respond to our argumentation in the framing of globalization and the AI. So we told you that we actually shifts what labor markets mean, because you don't need to be specialized with a very depth on one skill, but usually broadness of skill is something that's good, because companies want to hire people that have large varieties because they're less risky for you to hire them, especially in a world where technological advancements are rapidly changing. Even within medicine, they want someone who can understand and bolster things so that they can better implement new forms of technology that are existing. But lastly, they just assert that undergraduate degrees are useless. We told you that they can contextualize skills. We gave you the impacts of soft skills. They don't point to this, but we also told you about adaptability, which means that you're likely to actually get job security. Note that job security is analytically prior to everything they're saying, because there's no point in you getting a job if you cannot maintain it. We also told you just get a lot more freedom and fulfillment. They just brushed that off. Panel, we're winning.
I think that speaker very much for that very fine speech. You all are welcome to stay in the breakout room. I'm just going to take about 10 minutes. I'm also going to resume the recording in case Andrew wants to post this as well. Okay, thanks everyone for what was genuinely a very good round. I enjoyed it. I'm going to give some general pieces of feedback. I promise I'll do it quickly and we can get to the call. So I want to say 3 related things. The first is that there is a characterization problem with both teams in the round that both note towards each other. That is the classic trying to have your cake and eat it too. And what that means is that you're trying the absolute of packing both advantages and disadvantages into your model. And that's an issue because if you hinge your case on a particular characterization with what can be done ideally under your model, for example, the most ideal allocation within a small degree program on op, or the most ideal allocation and skill coverage that is both not challenging but also sufficiently diversified on gov in the undergraduate part of education. These are things that can very easily be attacked if you don't prove likelihood for why they're done ideally in the way that you describe. And so my suggestion is either to rely on less idyllic characterizations for what your side looks like, or to explain structurally why it is that the division that you support, especially in the sort of nitty-gritty motions where very little changes, why the margin that you propose on time or on the amount of degree makes your idyllic characterization possible, as opposed to on their side, that same division not being likely. The second thing that I want to say that's very related to this is that there's a problem acknowledging where the other side proves a margin, and instead there's an attempt to kind of call them out in the sort of characterization that sounds unrealistic, even if the process that they describe still does reflect a realistic change or margin in the round. So what I mean by this is, for example, when opposition attacks Gov on the fact that they can specialize anyway on their side without acknowledging the fact that there's still a margin that Gov gets in terms of the amount of time that you spend in an educational degree. The same is true for the fact that Gov may try to minimize the fact that there is more time spent in an educational institution, which is also the basis for their specialization idea in an attempt to prove that costs don't get high. So when you're trying to engage with the other side's argument, try to understand what the basic process they think changes is on a scale, and not just prove that the extreme degree to which they think that process activates doesn't happen, because I'm still likely to have anyway accepted the moderate effect of that sort of margin that they describe. So I think a lot of responses get ineffective if all you're doing is just prove that the extreme side of the process doesn't happen, but not that the process at its core isn't influential in the way that the other side describes. The last thing I want to say is this debate could have easily swayed one way or another with more weighing from either side, because both teams are operating on very distinct metrics and don't try too much to venture into each other's metrics. And so more work on which impact matters relative to the other side would have done both sides well. And I would note that what was particular about this round is that often this is a comment I would give in rounds where impacting was also weaker. In this round, impacting was very strong, but somehow comparative impacting to the other side's main impact, so that would be weighing, it was much weaker. There was a lot of why are we important and not why do they matter less. These are the three comments I have for both teams. This is a close but clear debate. The win goes to the team in government. Let's talk about why that's the case. Two clashes I want to discuss. The first is educational accessibility, and the second is educational quality of the degrees attained on both sides. I will note that the way that government will win this debate is in two ways. The first is by explaining why the second clash matters more on an impact level. The second is by being able to muddy the waters quite a bit on the first clash, making the margin there far less clear than on the second clash. I want to actually start by talking about the clash in educational quality. I think it's a little easier to explain what happens here. There are broadly two claims from government that opposition identifies as two claims, but claims they're contradictory, which kind of hurts op's ability to engage with the second one of these two claims. So government makes two arguments across their first two speeches. The first is that the existence of two separate degrees, an undergrad, more amateur one, and a more professional graduate one, means you have more time in undergraduate degree to cover more topical areas, and it means more exposure to different areas, which gives you diversified access in the job market. Now, we're going to talk about the impacts of job replacement in a second, but let's first crystallize the two things that governments say happen here. So that's the first thing they're saying happens is this wider coverage compared to a degree where you have to race towards the professional mark at the end. The second thing they say happens is that you're able to specialize more within this degree because the graduate degree means that you simply have more time to study things that matter more. You can pick a more specific specialization and all these sorts of things. How does OP engage with this? I think what OP does is take down the first mechanism without engaging enough with the second mechanism in a way that isn't just stating it's contradictory to the first. So on OP's claim that the two are contradictory, this is quite clearly pointed out by GovWhip to not be the case. Government can claim that the undergraduate degree provides skills and a foundation within the specialization that you would go into. Even if it is wide coverage, you need this as preparatory work in order to specialize within your graduate degree. And that means that you can't just do everything at the same time. You can still do things that are distinct from your graduate degree, but they're still important foundations, right? So the analogy here would be learning, as they say, biological formulas or notions that are important for your later medicinal like expertise or whatever, but are also distinct and would maybe give you a gateway job into other fields, etc. The part that is weaker here about government's argument, which LO identifies well, is two things. The first is that as much as government will try to explain why this undergraduate degree is very, very bite-sized and very accessible, as they will in the second clash, and the fact that they explain that it's also very varied and you cover a lot of ground diminishes the extent to which they're able to prove that this is actually a professionally marketable degree, especially since they set the threshold for what is professionally viable and very high, right? They say that companies need people that have a lot of expertise in order to overcome the more efficient AI, etc. And that means that government have a problem here because they don't identify why the very varied basic degrees they talk about are actually professionally viable if the job market really demands such high degrees of specialization. Moreover, LO tells them that it's also likely you pick a very similar field, even if it's distinct in some ways, it's not likely that the job markets you're able to pick are vastly different between the undergraduate and graduate fields you go into, which means that the wider coverage as a way to access diversification from Gov doesn't work very well. But their second mechanism that works well and that OP doesn't engage with fully is just the idea that specialization leads you to be able to access a higher level of skill that isn't currently accessed by more efficient algorithms and AI. And that just means that more time means I get to pick my specialization more. Now, the main way that OP tries to engage with this in second and third is to say, yes, but we cut on inefficiencies in the undergraduate degree that currently exists. So we pluck out the softies, and then we just get a medical degree by the end of the 6 years that would be the same as what you would get at the end of the 8 years because you just specialized earlier. This is where the general comment I mentioned comes in. Government repeatedly tells you that you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you pay less debt because you have less time in school, you have less time in school, which means you have less time to specialize and learn a discipline in depth. And you don't explain why there's such a big market failure in educational systems today that means that classes are just unnecessary for a degree, and that currently there are literally 4 years of material that you can cut out and they're not important for your specialization, which means that insofar as you lose 4 years of budgeting, you also lose 4 years of specialization on OP. What does this mean in terms of the impacts that government is able to reap? They have the obvious impact, which is just, you get more job security because you're more important for a corporation. This claim about the race is not relative to other people, by the way. OP is right that doesn't make sense because everyone gets more degrees, but it's relative to AI and whether or not you provide an additional advantage to companies over AI systems that might do the work in a more efficient way. Now, OpWhip has a pretty good response to this, which is that not all systems in the world are challenged by AI, to the degree that some of them might have AI as a supportive agent, but that a lot of them have a demand for human labor anyway. But I still think that the government claim works here for a vast majority of these skilled professions. I don't think they need to prove that it's true for all industries to still prove that it's the difference between getting a higher salary in many of them or between proving that in some sectors it will mean that to some extent people get fired. But they also have a series of positive externalities that are not just related to job security, and they are important because they're the way that they're going to outweigh opposition. So they say things like the fact that you improve the efficiency of companies, even if companies don't need you or won't fire you. You just are able to make sure companies don't collapse or generate higher profit margins, which means more tax revenue. Then it means you have more joy in your job because a specialized degree lets you have more mobility in your work. And also you have more choice about the kind of work that you want to do because more skills mean that you have more choice across the employment chain of what you want to do. And also using their undergraduate explanation of breadth, even if I don't accept that it means you can have professional careers in each of them, and at the very least means you have more sampling of each of the careers you may want to do in a graduate program. All of these are impacts they're able to extract from this central claim. That I think remains standing at the end of this clash. Let's now talk about accessibility and show how that gets outweighed by this first clash that I mentioned. So on accessibility, OP just says, look, it's a shorter degree, pay less, but also have more time to do jobs. I mean, you get out of school quicker, so you start earning a wage sooner. So it's this sort of double pressure towards both not being able to make a wage and having higher costs. There are some back and forths here, for example, about whether government subsidize this or not. So both sides identify pressures to do that. The masses that DPM talks about, LO talks about the fact that maybe the rich don't want this because it's not useful for them. Government will also talk about the fact that maybe there are jobs and internships that you can do in your graduate program. And OP will respond to this that there is some dead zone that you have to cover in an undergraduate degree if you're not yet professional. I don't think Gov does a lot until government whip in order to mitigate the fact that there is simply a big cost. And yes, they're able to mitigate the extent to which this cost is unattainable to certain middle income people, but they will have to take out a loan, and that loan will mean that they get wages, that their wages undo their debt later down the line, or maybe even never. I think what happens in GovWhip is a much more significant muddying of the waters on this clash than we got from previous speakers on GovBench. And that's simply the use of the last part of the DPM to explain why there is often actually a benefit to having an undergraduate degree that is much less professional, as DLO concedes, because it gives you a sort of two-package system where people who can't afford a longer undergraduate degree or a more challenging undergraduate degree are able to pick instead that kind of softer form of undergraduate degree without going into a graduate program. And this is particularly robust given that the way that OP engages with the Gov argument on specialization, as I previously noted, is to say on our side, undergraduate degrees just become much more challenging and are elongated, which means that GovWhip gets to claim in response to them that they simply get more bite-sized chunks of these degrees. Not only that, but GovWhip also explains why this not only boosts the ability of people that otherwise wouldn't stay in OPS undergraduate programs, it also boosts the university's capacities to subsidize and to do things like scholarships, because you just have more people that register, which means there's more tuition fees that can then be used for scholarships, etc. Does this flip OPS claim on debt? Probably not, because OPS claim on debt is difference between 1x and 2x. You have twice the amount of years. And Gov's claim is a slightly less challenging undergraduate program because they still need the undergraduate program to lay some foundations. But it proves to me that to some significant population of people, the undergraduate degree offered by Gov is the only sort of degree they're going to get on either side of the house. And even if OP proves that there is then a group of people that would miss out on a professional degree, I'm unsure whether this bigger population matters more than this smaller population getting any degree at all, which leaves this clash in some doubt, or even if it's a slight OP win at the end, the margins here are not clear and should already seem quite apparent that analytically it's closer than that first clash. But even if that wasn't enough, I think there's weighing at the end of GovWhip that is a little shallow, but does a good job of, in the absence of any other weighing in this round, to explain why that first class should matter more than the second. And that's just the fact that efficiency and motivation affect more populations than the niche population that would be talking about of people who need access to academic institutions, but also the fact that they're affecting more metrics, right? Like even if both teams are talking about whether you'll get fired down the line or if you'll get a job in the first place, these sort of work on the same axis of job security, right? Like one is saying you won't get hired, the other is saying you'll get fired more in the future. But Gov has impacts on other axes of impacts, which is just, the amount of joy that you get, whether you pick the right job for yourself, the societal efficiency that are extracted. And sure, these aren't as well explained or as central of government of a gov impact as that first one on job security, but they do exist as quite strong positive externalities that also allow government to weigh that impact over what OP has to say on this question. So for that reason, government will be able to weigh over this clash and muddy the waters in it. Are there any questions about the call? Cool.
No questions from Prop. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the feedback.
Could I ask 2 unrelated questions when the recording's over?
Yep, I'm gonna pause it now.
Perfect.